odd. A conversation with Chuck Feeney is unlike any other conversation you'll have with anyone on earth.
Paradoxical. When the history comes to be written, it will be shown that Chuck Feeney did have a significant impact on Ireland.
Inspiring. He inspired us to think big.
Spiritual. Chuck Feeney, probably heard this from a whole lot of other people, is a totally one-off.
Compassionate. He'll know more about you in 20 minutes than you'd ever know about him.
Oh, I think the man is a saint.
This is the remarkable story of a man who had it all, but realised it wasn't enough. Chuck Feeney has led an extraordinary life. He became one of the wealthiest men on the planet, but throughout his life has chosen to remain outside the glare of the media spotlight. For over 25 years, his contribution to Ireland, both economically and politically, has been monumental, yet until recently it went undocumented. Now, in his late 70s, he's telling his story in the hope that others will be inspired as he was. It begins in the Depression era of 1930s America. Charles Francis Feeney was born in 1931 into a small Irish-American community in New Jersey. This was the time of the Great Depression, and both his parents worked hard to give their kids a good start in life.
I went to a school in an Irish-American neighborhood, and it was a Catholic school, you know, we felt we were part of that community.
Chuck's mother, Madeline, had a strong sense of doing right by the less fortunate. She worked nights as a volunteer Red Cross nurse, and for her, there was no one quite like her only son.
But he could do things with a straight face, and he could get away with it, because he was my Charles. As far as my mother was concerned, he could commit no sins.
She was a good woman, clearly, and she would just consider it as an obligation to help your neighbors.
When you live in a family like that, that she was very, very concerned about her neighbors, I think that rubs off on you, you know, you are concerned about people.
You had already been involved in a few money-making schemes. I mean, you had an eye to making a buck.
Yeah, the typical things that kids do, mow the lawns, do odd jobs for neighbors. Particularly recall a friend of mine whose name was Moose Foley, and I partnered with him because he was the biggest guy in the class. When we'd go out to shovel snow, I'd be the front man. I'd go over and sign up the places we'd had to shovel, and then I'd whistle up for Moose, and he'd come over and start shoveling, and I'd start selling again.
Moose Foley did most of the shoveling, I know that, because my father used to say to him, you were a real conniver, you know, you're always thinking, you know.
After leaving school, he joined the Air Force and was stationed in Japan as a radio operator during the Korean War. One of the benefits of his military service, as he well knew, was the right to a free education afterwards.
Veterans Administration offices have been set up in every state, and it's here the ex-soldier goes if he wants to continue his education under the GI Bill of Rights. You mean he can get any kind of education he wants? Now you're getting the idea.
Chuck Feeney, the kid from a blue-collar New Jersey town, aimed high. He applied and was accepted into the respected Ivy League University of Cornell, the first in his family ever to go to college. The grant from the GI Bill didn't leave Chuck much extra, and it wasn't long before he started looking around for money-making opportunities.
I saw this guy coming around selling sandwiches, and I saw the students flocked down to buy a sandwich, and so I said, I can do that, it's not difficult, and so I became a self-made sandwich man.
It was at Cornell that he met a group of men who would later play vital roles in his business life. The most influential of all was a young New Yorker studying law.
I thought he was selling sandwiches with too much bread and too little peanut butter. He was clearly an entrepreneur. His Cornell experience was, I think, for him transformative. And he not only enjoyed the experience and the people, but tremendously enjoyed the friendships. And he always had this sense of gratitude. And therefore, as part of his overall view, that it's good to give back.
Following his graduation in hotel management, he travelled to France to continue his education, a decision which would change his life forever.
Life is playing the hands that you're dealt, and I wasn't quite sure what cards I would be dealt, but I was always thinking about ways of making a buck by working myself as opposed to working for somebody.
In 1956, there were 50 ships of the US 6th Fleet in the Mediterranean alone. Each of the 30,000 servicemen was entitled to buy liquor tax-free, and Chuck was quick to spot a good business opportunity.
I was in a bar and I ran into an Englishman who was just starting up a business of selling liquor to the naval ships. And he sent me down to Athens. I got down there and they told me that the visit of the ships had been canceled. Using my innate intelligence, I spotted a couple of hookers and asked them, did they know when the ships were coming, and they knew exactly the day. I stayed on for the 2 weeks, and then I started my career selling liquor to the ships.
Chuck, the ex-GI, and his partner had found the perfect business. No set-up capital and cash up front.
We were buying something for $5 plus the transport cost, and selling it for almost $15. I looked at the market and said, well, geez, if it's good for the military, it must be good for the tourists. So we started doing the same thing, selling them gallon packages of liquor. I said, well, if you can sell liquor, why can't you sell perfume? And so we sort of expanded our range of products.
As the sales to the tourists continued, Chuck realized that there was a new market opening up with the military.
And they would get so many requests for automobiles, he said, well, we ought to get into the automobile business. And Germany was a natural, because at that time there were about 250,000 military in Germany with dependents. And so that was why the business was started there in Frankfurt in the summer of 1964. You had an immediate sense that there was almost some genius with this fellow. Just his focus on life, focus on the business.
Definitely, what do they say, type A personality? For sure. Walked quickly, talked quickly, worked incessantly.
Things were looking up as the sale of cars, alcohol and perfumes continued. But Chuck and his team were in for a shock. Back in New York, they brought in an old college friend to advise them on a tax issue.
We did reorganize the businesses, and we reorganized them so that the tax risk was eliminated. The bad news is that they weren't making money, but they didn't know it.
Well, when I arrived in New York, it was clearly a mess. Yeah, it couldn't be described any other way. There was no accounting systems, and it took not very long to conclude that the liabilities exceeded the assets by approximately $1,600,000.
We got involved in businesses too quickly. Before we knew it, we were subject to cutthroat competition. I mean, if you fail honestly, you don't go to jail. If you fail dishonestly, you do go to jail.
Cash flow was tremendous in that people paid very early for the cars. So everybody looked at this money in the bank as profit, as it were. There were no expense controls of any sort. People spent money as they saw fit, and it resulted in the enormous deficit. We would be very lucky if we just got it out of debt and closed it down and moved on to something else.
The business was in serious trouble, and the new team of Chuck Feeney, Alan Parker, Bob Miller and Tony Polaro had no choice but to pay their debts and move on. But an opportunity was just around the corner, which was soon to make them one of the most successful business partnerships in the world. The concept of airport duty-free shops was not new. In fact, the very first duty-free shop was opened in Shannon in 1946. But in the early 60s, international travel was still confined to the privileged few, and large profits from duty-free sales were unimagined. Concessions to run the shops were granted by each government to the highest bidder.
A friend of ours wrote to us to tell about a shop that was going to open up at the Honolulu International Airport, and there would be the concession to sell any kind of duty-free merchandise you want. We bid about $125,000, guaranteed over 5 years. I got in no time at all. We were doing a giant amount of business.
Oh yeah, Chuck was always the most optimistic, and because he was a visionary, he could see what was going to happen. I was just looking at the figures and adding them up. I could see them growing, but no, Chuck clearly was the visionary.
With the Olympic Games of 1964, the Japanese government was keen to present a more liberal image to the world. Japanese citizens were allowed to travel abroad in greater numbers, and the most popular destination was Honolulu in Hawaii.
Chuck's instincts are sensational, and his competitiveness and tenacity are amazing. He's also completely focused. So whenever there was an opportunity to make a change, big or small, to improve the business, Chuck would often see it.
As we explored the Japanese market, we realized that they were keen to buy bargains. And we would sell a bottle of Johnny Walker Black Label at that stage for about $7 a bottle. It cost them in Japan $35 a bottle, so it was a bargain.
And so you had this frenzy. The same was true of perfume, the same was true of cigarettes. They were buying for 10% of what they could buy it in Japan. And in many cases, you couldn't even find the product in Japan.
It was very obvious then that this is a business that had great potential. And I think that one thing that should be indicated about Chuck is that he had the foresight. I mean, he had the vision.
The best descriptive word for that is lucky, because, you know, I mean, if you want to pick an emerging market, pick one that people want, need, get value from, and all of the things that we did qualified.
One of the rules that the business adopted early on, and for which I was appointed the policeman, was quiet, actually anonymity. And at least in Chuck's case, was a desire to stay out of the limelight. The more you advertised your success and bragged about it, the more likely it is that you were going to attract both jealousy and competition.
With the incoming 747s, I mean, it just changed the business dramatically overnight. You know, the lid literally blew off.
Well, the 747 has flown millions of people this past year.
Some of the first years that I was there, I think we were doing like $10 million a year at the airport, and the downtown store, I mean, during its heyday would do $1 million a day. I mean, it was mind-boggling.
You know, we were just trying to make a buck, and that seemed like a good way to make a buck.
It was an exciting time. I mean, every day was like getting up to the kickoff, because it would be always something very dramatic, very exciting about it. We drank a lot of champagne, we drank a lot of everything. but it was, you know, when you work hard, you worked hard, and when we played hard as well.
What was the buzz for you at that stage? Was it the business or the making the money, or both?
I guess it was the success of the business, yeah. So we started with nothing, and now look what we've got.
Well, the money began to grow pretty quickly, and I would say by the early 70s, the profits were rolling up very quickly. By that time, it was more than a single duty-free shop. They had bid elsewhere. And they were the largest duty-free retailer in the world. I think by the late 70s, they had 5,000 or 6,000 employees. The volume by that time was $3 billion a year or so. And because of the structure that had been put in place, virtually all of those profits were tax-free.
I grew up with my parents having these parties and having a grand old time. We were the house where people came and had barbecues and had parties, and people always came with their kids. It was always kids and adults parties.
I enjoyed what I did. I enjoyed particularly the people that I worked with, and I was always thinking that I don't need another $1 million.
But as the profits rolled in and the four partners revelled in their multi-million-dollar lifestyles, Chuck began to realise the effects that great wealth could have, not only on him, but also on his family.
My dad was kicking us in the butt since we were 14. Get out the door, do this yourself, figure it out. He was pushing us to be active and sporty and tough.
I felt that they should have the opportunity to see how money is earned. And they knew that there's a difference between what you make and what you're given.
More than anything, he wanted us to have goals and passions. And he thought, well, how could they have this? They're born with everything already. You know, people have to fight and strive. So he made sure we did.
I remember having a conversation with Chuck and quoting to him, which I can only do approximately, the statement that the Reverend Gates made to John D. Rockefeller, in which he said to Rockefeller, your wealth is rolling up, and if you don't do something about it, it will crush you and crush your family. And Chuck kind of got that. He is uncomfortable with displays of wealth and lavishness, and I think that grew over time. I think there were times when he enjoyed entertaining people at some of the houses that the family then owned. So I think there were things about it that he enjoyed, but the growth of the disquietude eventually outweighed the pleasure at being able to entertain and bring people together.
There's a halfway mark where we were living a certain life. You know, my dad was fun at a party. Then I think things got a little bit more serious with the amount of money and also an awareness. When you travel and see how people suffer really, you know, it's not just an idea.
I think life is a learning process, and you read books, you read stories, you empathize with people. I had always empathized with people who have it tough in life, and the world is full of people who don't get enough to eat. It was by 1980 I started thinking, where's all this leading? What am I going to do with it? Like many of the wealthy people today, they have the money, but they wouldn't be able to spend it if they started to spend it.
It was the early 80s, and the decade of greed was well underway. While much of the world was consumed with making money, Chuck Feeney decided he was going to do something completely different. It was the start of a journey which was to change his life and the lives of many around him.
I think because of his upbringing, a blue-collar New Jersey guy, a guy in college had to sell sandwiches to get through school, is that when he started making these tremendous amounts of money, he was almost embarrassed by it.
He worked so hard to get there, and once he did, I think he found, I know he didn't like these fancy dinners, and he didn't want to go places that they were invited to, that was, you know, he was very low-key.
Chuck doesn't own a car, doesn't own a house, has one pair of shoes and a $15 watch.
I would be unhappy with myself if I was wasting money on anything, and that includes living. So I get what I want from life and move on.
He's happy going out to dinner, and if he can get a good bottle of wine, he's happy with that, and sometimes even a better bottle of wine. It's just that his personal style is not self-indulgent or lavish.
You know, I'm a guy who's said that I could be happy at with a grilled cheese and tomato sandwich.
Because he'd always insisted on remaining anonymous, very few people had any idea just how much Feeney was worth, not even his family. By now, his fortune was estimated at around $1 billion, and although no one knew, he was secretly developing a radical plan to give everything away.
Well, I think it was clear throughout that there would be a moment when virtually all of the assets would be used for charitable purposes. Never perfectly clear what virtually all meant, because Chuck didn't want to impoverish his family, but it was clear, increasingly clear, that he didn't want very much for himself.
Did you not at any stage wonder yourself, am I going nuts? Am I doing the right thing here?
Oh, I suppose you always question business decisions, and this was in effect a type of business decision.
I warned him, a good lawyer is supposed to warn clients about risks, and I said, you know, you can't change your mind on this. Once this is done, if the money is transferred, the assets are transferred, they're gone. And if you change your mind 3 days later, you can't get them back. And if you think you've made a mistake, you can't get them back. And if things go awry, you can't get them back. It's irrevocable. Are you sure you want to do this?
And there was no going back?
No going back once we decided.
I think he actually was impatient with that because he'd made up his mind, thought it was fine. He said, yeah, let's get on with it.
Chuck Feeney, the man who had worked his whole life to build a business empire, was about to change everything with the stroke of a pen. In November 1982, having made a relatively modest provision for his family, he signed over his entire fortune to his new foundation, the Atlantic Philanthropies.
I got a phone call one day from him, and he said, I have a big announcement. And he said, I just wanted you to know that I've given everything away. And I said, you mean every penny? And he said, I've given it all away to a foundation. And I said, oh, well, that's good if that's what you want to do, you know.
I mean, I'm really proud of my dad. I think he's just really an extraordinary man. He's, you know, he's just such, who does this, honestly, who does this?
I was surprised, I will admit, but I knew that he didn't do it without having given a lot of thought to it. And the Irish expression that he has, there's no pockets and shrouds. Well, I think he just came to that realization and said, okay, I'm going to change what I'm doing.
I guess down to a realization that it doesn't add anything to your life. As I say, it may make life a bit more comfortable for you, but I'm not uncomfortable today.
From now on, all of Chuck Feeney's multi-million-dollar profits from the duty-free business would be paid directly into Atlantic Philanthropies. His next destination was a small, poor, underdeveloped country on the edge of Europe.
I'm kind of a plastic patty. An Irish American is a person whose origins are Irish, and my grandmother was from Fermanagh. I guess I qualify as an Irish American because I've been involved in a number of things that were to do with Ireland in my adult years.
When Feeney arrived in Ireland in the early 1980s, the country was in the grip of a desperate recession. Unemployment and emigration were at record levels. There was little investment in industry or education. Things were bleak.
He begun routinely spending time in Ireland and doing what he always does. He goes to some place and he walks around and he sniffs around and he talks to people, and it's this entrepreneurial seeking mode.
Feeney had had first-hand experience of the benefits of education, and he quickly spotted a real need in Ireland.
Irish education had not kept pace, and I just had the experience in my life of realizing that it's with educated people that you can achieve more, and so we wanted to reinforce the structures of the universities.
One of the cities in Ireland in most need of investment in third-level education was Limerick. The people of Limerick had been campaigning for a university for years. Ed Walsh, the young head of Limerick's existing National Institute, had big ambitions to convert it from a small campus into a top-level university. The odds were stacked against him.
The thing about Chuck Feeney is that he likes the underdog, and Limerick was the underdog. First of all, Limerick is physically a little bit separate from other places, and the institution was a new institution which was bucking the trend. Ed Walsh was introducing new thinking into a rather stultified higher education system in Ireland and was not welcomed for that. Those are the sort of people that Chuck Feeney likes. Mavericks.
A very unassuming man on a first encounter, just because he dressed so badly and was so self-effacing. A very ordinary kind of guy. He could have stepped off a tractor in County Clare. And when he came into my office in Limerick, most Americans would have a quick encounter and someone would take them away and see the building. This man had read, and he was profoundly knowledgeable about Ireland and its predicament and the trouble and the potential. So something clicked.
We did a lot of bricks and mortar at the very beginning because some of the things that we wanted to do, for example, here in Ireland, were going to require buildings at universities, student accommodation, libraries, and that sort of stuff.
Chuck says, look, you've got one chance to do something extremely well. The country does not have a purpose-designed concert hall. Why don't we bring in the best designer we can? I know one in New York. He flew in, and we'll design a world-class concert hall that Ireland can be proud of and the university can be proud of. By the way, you can design it in such a way that it will meet the needs of students and conferrings and everything else. So this was the first major project.
The anonymity which had been crucial to the success of his business became an obsession with Feeney. As the buildings went up, maintaining the veil of secrecy became the condition of any grants the foundation made.
The joke used to be in the trade that AP was synonymous with anonymous.
He explained to me that if we revealed who was providing the funding, it would cease. It was very strange trying to explain to faculty and staff here where the money was coming from. Was I involved in the drugs business or something like that? Because these magnificent buildings were rising out of the ground, and we couldn't explain really who was doing it.
In 1989, Limerick finally got its university, and as the campus grew, so too did jobs and opportunities in the city and beyond.
No matter what way you look on campus, you can find Chuck Feeney's mark.
The thing he liked about the university program was that there were buildings, there was bricks and mortar. You could kick them, you could touch them, you could feel them. They were there.
Those who knew him before said that being transformed, he was much happier and he was really enjoying life. The more he gave, the more he enjoyed it. It was quite amazing.
The effect of Feeney's donations to Limerick and other universities was slowly transforming the country. But these investments would be dwarfed by the sheer scale of the next phase of the project. Meanwhile, events in his home county of Fermanagh were drawing him into the complex world of Northern Irish politics.
Well, I think the terminal event was certainly the bombing in Enniskillen. It just seemed so gross, and they were just the people who unfortunately happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It struck me that, this is not a good Irish thing. I mean, we're not that kind of people that want to make people disappear from the earth because of their views.
I met Chuck one night at PJ Clark's, sat him down and said I was considering putting together a group to go to Northern Ireland to become involved and try and bring an American dimension to solving the Irish issue. And Chuck instantly said, yes, I want to do it, which was remarkable given who he was and given the fact that, this was really a kind of a fool's errand in many people's eyes.
At the time, there was no solution in sight to the violence in Northern Ireland. Sinn Féin was censored under Section 31 and had become political pariahs. But there was a feeling that if the party could be brought into the political mainstream, it could help move the peace process forward.
At that time, I sort of felt that the business of bringing a solution to the problem was as good a business as you could get into.
In early '93, O'Dowd suggested that Chuck Feeney should meet the head of Sinn Féin, Gerry Adams.
The first time I met him was at a safe house in Dublin, and he struck me right away as being open, straightforward, and I thought that this is the kind of person who can talk to both sides.
What Chuck brought to it was a confidence or a trust or an acceptance that we were genuinely trying to do something to get the whole process together, which would build a bridge out of conflict.
Feeney joined O'Dowd and a group of well-respected businessmen who are planning a landmark trip to Northern Ireland.
We had conducted negotiations with the Clinton White House before we left, because we had become involved with the Clinton people, and we said, look, we're going to go over there, and while we're there will be a ceasefire by the IRA. It'll be unannounced, it'll be for 10 days, and it'll send a signal that the Republican movement want to deal, want to move this issue forward.
The US delegation arrived for their meeting to a frenzy of media attention. The American group of businessmen and trade unionists then got down to 3 hours of talks.
He had a very incisive sense of people, and I could see how he was remarkably successful in business. And he was a great man to kind of size up a situation.
As he was in his financial business, as he was in trying to make sure things were done a fair deal, he was as sharp as any razor. I mean, he knew the goal. And when you said something to him, as complicated as Northern Ireland was, he understood what you were saying.
Chuck Feeney works in a very intuitive way. He doesn't have a very structured approach to things. He goes by gut and by feel. And in particular, he's always very concerned to get a sense of the people he's dealing with, and particularly the leader of the organisation that he might be looking at.
Feeney, the anonymous billionaire, was now at the centre of a major world news story. He felt that real progress could only be made if the delegation met representatives of all sides.
You know, we talked to the paramilitaries, and some of the stuff was that they were concerned about the war that the Republicans had carried out had been funded by Irish America. And for the move forward, you know, the Americans were going to play a big role in terms of the whole peace process, how the future of Northern Ireland was sort of designed, developed, and all the rest of it. So we needed to actually talk to Irish America to find out where they stood on all of this. And, you know, from my point of view, I think that that part of the process was very easy, because Irish America were open to hearing what was going on, and they were very open to actually, you know, I suppose in many ways, helping loyalism move on.
The visit was a success, but the next challenge was to try to convince a hostile US State Department that it should support a radical proposal.
Well, we had a very basic plan that we would go back to the White House. We would explain that our visit had coincided with a 10-day IRA ceasefire. It showed that the goodwill on the part of the Republican movement was there, and that now the White House needed to make a gesture.
We believed, after discussing it at the congressional level with some of the representatives, that there was support out there for a way to get people together, and that culminated in the visa for Gerry Adams, which seems perfectly logical today, but they didn't think so at the time.
How difficult was it for your group to persuade Clinton to give Adams that visa in the face of pretty stiff opposition from the British?
I think, in fairness to Bill Clinton, that he thought the thing through himself, and thought that the talking was a better answer than killing.
It was around this time that Feeney made a controversial decision to fund the establishment of a Sinn Féin office in Washington.
My rationale was straightforward. I wanted to see an end to the problem, and the idea of having an office where people could meet and see each other seemed to me right.
There were a lot of people counselling him not to get involved. I know for a fact that many people in his own organisation called him, and I had a few calls myself from people in his organisation who were frantically saying, you know, what the hell are you doing?
I wish he had not decided to give it money. That, I think, was not a good idea, and Chuck disagrees on that. But it was his money. It was certainly never the foundation's money. That's an important issue. The foundation never did and never would give money to a political cause.
Because the concern at the time was that the IRA were not fully committed to the ceasefire, and in fact broke the ceasefire during that time. Were you not concerned that your money was going to go to the wrong place?
Oh, I suppose there's a concern, but as I say, knowing the people and seeing them on a regular basis reinforced the belief that the IRA was and Sinn Féin were looking for a solution.
Do you feel there was any lasting damage done to your good name?
Well, not that I know of.
Just over a year after Chuck Feeney and his delegation visited Belfast, another famous American would follow. It was to be an historic turning point. If the President of the United States could walk down the Falls Road, surely anything was possible.
As he went into Mackerlane's bakery, the crowds had already broken through the barriers, providing a real security headache for the Secret Service.
I think one of the most glorious moments for us was President Clinton coming to Ireland for the first time to Belfast. And also I think one of the greatest days for Ireland, and that we're here. We had this incredible situation where the President of the United States was walking up the Falls Road and walking down the Shankill Road, which a couple of years previous to that could never even have been considered.
I think that Chuck and others like him, and he's the one that strikes me most vividly, as wanting to return, of wanting in some way the place that his people couldn't live in, that he has been part of the energy of making it a better place for the people who do live here.
Clinton's 1995 visit to Belfast is now widely recognised as one of the key turning points in the history of Northern politics.
Chuck was such a huge part of that. I would go so far as to say I don't think it would have happened without him. I think he was central to the American role, and the American role was central to the process.
Aside from Feeney's personal involvement, Atlantic Philanthropies continues to invest millions in projects in Northern Ireland on all sides of the political divide.
Chuck, I suppose, in many ways, the Atlantic Philanthropy, put his money where his mouth is. And he put money in the struggling loyalist communities, and he hasn't asked, are you a Republican, are you a loyalist, are you a Jew, are you a Muslim? He hasn't asked that. What he has done is it says, these people they need a leg up, and I've got money that can help do that, and that's what he's done.
Throughout the morning at his hotel, the Taoiseach met a number of chief executives representing healthcare, electronics and the service sector of the telecommunications industry. 20 of these companies are already in Ireland. 15 others are looking for a base to service their companies' European operations.
In the 1990s, Ireland, with its low corporation tax and ready workforce, was beginning to attract more and more multinational business. What the country didn't have was the educational infrastructure required to sustain the economic upturn.
Ireland ranked very poorly in the international tables in terms of expenditure on research and development. And here we were presenting ourselves as a future major knowledge economy, and we weren't spending money on the knowledge.
The reality was that in 1997, the government made an announcement that they would make 1 million available to meet the equipment needs of all of the Irish universities. So that was nonsense.
And by the way, top of the morning to you.
After the success in Limerick, Feeney was thinking big. He knew that a colossal investment in education would create a generation of highly skilled graduates, and that they would attract big-name employers and create opportunities for others.
There are people out there who rationalise that helping universities is helping the economy, is helping yourself, is helping your neighbours.
But in order to fund the plans on the scale that he envisaged, he needed more money, a lot more money. So, in 1997, he sold Atlantic's share in DFS. As a result, almost overnight, the foundation was flooded with over $1.6 billion.
Chuck, can't stand having money around. He just likes to see it spent. So he said to me one day in the summer of 1997, he said, look, I really like these building projects we've been doing with these universities, but they're not moving fast enough, and I'd really like to up the tempo.
Funding from the government didn't have much of a structure to it. We were the first ones that came along and said, okay, well, if you will put up the money, let's do a 3-year, 5-year plan, and you put up your money, we'll put up our money, and we'll move it forward.
I suppose in the early years, when he knew that the capital programme wouldn't be able to do that, he didn't put on that pressure. When he then realised, 97, 98, 99, that things were better for the country, he then put the pressure on to make sure that the state lived up to what he believed was his personal standard.
A breakfast meeting was arranged between the Higher Education Authority and officials from the Department of Education.
Over breakfast, John said, if we put up £75 million for research funding, would you match it?
We'll put £75 million on the table, but you've got to come up with a matching £75 million. And they kind of almost fell off their chairs.
There was a moment's hesitation, so I said, I think we could write a paper on how we might spend this.
Atlantic's revolutionary funding plan was presented to the Department of Finance.
Their reaction to any proposal is to say no, and that was the reaction that we instantly met.
Resistance was that, you see, if you took this money, that was bringing the capital program for third level education to a certain level, and therefore, you know, what had happened next year. I mean, what held the country back for years, we just didn't have the money for capital. We always had to put up more money into day-to-day issues. But he had a broader view of things and a correct view of things.
So we started working on the political channel, and we started, I suppose, applying all the sort of blackmail and violence that one uses in these intense interdepartmental debates. So when Atlantic played their part as well, they sprung an ultimatum. They said, unless it's fixed by such and such a date, which was a Saturday morning, we're off.
But in terms of them making a decision, they dragged their feet and you had to put them on a clock.
Yeah, I guess so. But that's the way it works out sometimes.
We had, quite frankly, I can say it now, we had the academic debate within government and within the departments who said, no, this isn't good value. And I believe Chuck wasn't going to put it in. I mean, it was, when you think, it was a bit of a stupid argument that, you know, you were going to turn away the best gift horse that you'd ever get.
After weeks of hard negotiations, it was finally agreed that if Atlantic put up £75 million, the Irish government would match it. The Programme for Research in Third Level Institutions, or PRTLI, was born.
These funds represent a major advance for the country's research community, and their representatives look pleased at today's announcement in Dublin.
It will mean that we will be in a position to attract the best staff to our universities and to our institutes of technology in the research areas, which will improve quality. It will mean very significant capital investment in terms of new buildings and new equipment.
And this transformed the nature of higher education and the nature of Ireland's attempt to attract foreign direct investment. So the multinationals, the Intels and the Microsofts and the Hewlett-Packards could be convinced that they could move upwards and put sophisticated research and development into Ireland. Chuck was behind what triggered this whole thing, and I doubt that the Department of Education would have put a euro upon a euro to do this, were it not for Chuck's initiative.
What I think he did for many of us who came in touch with him was that he inspired us to think big. If we aspire to being a leading knowledge-based economy and society in the world, we needed to behave like one.
This was typical of how Chuck worked. There was the visionary part, which was probably more important than the funding, but he followed through with funding to help others turn a good vision into reality. This he did with government, this he did with Ireland.
The idea was we showed them the light.
To date, Atlantic has invested $1.2 billion in Ireland alone. Over $750 million of that has gone into third-level education, and the resulting new population of highly qualified postgraduates was undoubtedly a key driver of the Celtic Tiger economy. As with all his grants, there was no publicity, no names on buildings, only a desire to promote opportunity through education, all the more necessary in troubled economic times.
Ireland is subject to good times and bad times, and tougher times are coming, and that just requires more support.
The Irish public have often proven their interest in seeing wrongdoing in corporate and political life being exposed. Up to now, tribunals set up by the state have been the way it's done. But now a private group is about to begin its investigations too, with retired Judge Fergus Flood at the head of its board.
Feeney's involvement in Irish politics continued when, in 2005, Atlantic funded the establishment of a Centre for Public Inquiry, an independent watchdog charged with uncovering corruption in public life.
Well, the concept of citizen watchdog organizations is kind of unexceptional in a country like the United States, and in many other countries as well, in what you would say are mature democratic societies.
I think the idea of the Centre was to hold government accountable for things that happened, because they call the shots.
The person they hired to head up the centre seemed a logical choice. Frank Connolly was an established journalist whose work on corruption had contributed to the establishment of the Flood and Morris tribunals.
We had a fellow, Frank Connolly, who was, I think, recognised as one of the very good investigative journalists here in Ireland.
I think, in quite frankly, this was just seen as a strange group to be watching ourselves. And I suppose if you were to take it, if in Paris an organisation funded by a group of Irish people was set up to start involving them, what would the French think?
You felt you were entitled to fund such an operation in Ireland, and you felt it was worthwhile.
Yes, if the Centre was ever able to carry out the goals that we had set out, it would have been worthwhile.
I think there was mentions that we were planning to target individuals in our investigations, which of course was absolutely absurd. We had never suggested any such thing. We never did any such thing. What we said we were going to do was examine matters of public importance.
This was the Centre's first report, and many more, they say, are on the way on a range of controversies.
In the beginning, the Centre produced 2 well-received reports on planning problems in Trim and on the Corrib gas controversy. But soon there were allegations emerging that seriously threatened to undermine the independence of the Centre. Frank Connolly, brother of Niall Connolly, one of the so-called Columbia Three, was alleged to have travelled to Colombia on a false passport. The Taoiseach met with Feeney. I
and Mike McDougall asked the question, what was this really about? And I think we gave him a flavour. It was no question of attacking or lecturing, because he wasn't that kind of a person. He was entitled to do whatever he wanted with his money. But I think we gave him an honest assessment of the view in Leinster House, and no more than that.
Undoubtedly, the Centre for Public Inquiry aspires to be an organ of public opinion, but equally it is one which, in subversive hands, has the capacity to gravely undermine the authority of the state.
I mean, the way it was seen in Leinster House was that we're going to investigate decisions that were made and planning other things. Well, we see that Bord Pleanála and the courts are the places that you do that, not ad hoc committees.
Citing the interests of national security, Minister for Justice Michael McDougall released Garda documents to the Irish newspapers, claiming to prove that Connolly had travelled to Colombia.
All I have done is to give to the Irish Independent, at its request, a copy of the forgery so that people in this country can determine where the truth lies.
Even though the DPP found no evidence against him, pressure intensified on Connolly to say where he had been at the time in question.
Did you ask him where he was for those couple of weeks?
Probably, or if not myself, I said find out where Frank was for those couple of weeks.
And you got no answer that...
Well, he didn't answer that.
It then became a matter of credibility for the organisation, and that was a very painful and difficult episode that I think upset Chuck Feeney a lot, I have to say.
We hadn't researched far enough, and as I say, we were surprised by what we discovered, and then we tried to carry the can for that, because look, what you don't discover is your fault too.
Are you in a position now, or do you think you would be in a position ever to say where you were at the time and finally end all that speculation and smear?
Again, I don't think it's my position. I've already said to you that this Garda investigation, for what it was, is finished. That's what we've been told. So it's nonsense, in my view, for me to be trying to explain things based on an investigation that was never justified in the first place.
If Chuck Feeney had have stood up at any stage and had have articulated that this is what he wanted it for, people would have accepted that. He never did that. And I can only give you Bertie Ahern's view of that. My view of that is he never had researched this through. That's my view.
In a way, could it be said that he was railroaded out, not by you, but perhaps by the government or individuals within the government?
Well, that certainly was an assessment someone could make.
Elements in power, and not only that, but including the former Taoiseach, I think, didn't like the idea of where this was going to go and where it potentially could go. And if you look back now, what's happened in the last couple of years, we've discovered corruption on a scale none of us ever envisaged would emerge or even existed at the time. And I think that's partly the tragedy of all of this.
Atlantic withdrew its funding and the centre was closed in December 2005.
The sad thing about this is that the cause of the watchdog organisation was set back as a result of what happened, and it'll be some years, I think, before it can be revived.
Chuck Feeney's philosophy of giving while living is central to everything he does. His belief that it's better to give money away now has changed the lives of millions, and his work isn't over yet. Feeney, an extremely shy man, recently made the difficult decision to sacrifice his anonymity and cooperate on a biography with Conor O'Clery. He did it because he wants his message of giving while living to inspire others.
My sense is that he's getting to a stage in his life now where, as I think all of us do when we get a little bit older, you ask yourself, what has the meaning of your life been and what have you been able to contribute? I sense that the most important thing for him now is to spread the gospel of giving while living and to influence more people who have money to give it away and to give it away wisely.
We are what we call a spend down foundation, which means that we are going to, over the next 9 years or thereabouts, to spend down the assets of the foundation, which would be in excess of $3 billion.
In order to meet the deadline of spending our endowment out of existence by 2016, we have to give away $1 million every day of the year, 365 days a year.
There's logic in making things happen now, especially if now there are things out there that are necessary.
Nowadays, Chuck Feeney still travels to see the work that Atlantic Philanthropies supports in 7 countries around the world, in projects on ageing, children and youth, population health, and reconciliation and human rights.
And I'm not here to tell anybody what they should do with their money. If you make your money, you do what you want with it. But I think there is an obligation, certainly, for the haves to reach out and to look at, see what they can do. Any money that people give to any good cause, as long as it's well managed, is worthwhile. I just hope that that people will sort of try it. You'll like it.
Today, with the same relentless drive and attention to detail that made him one of the world's richest men, Chuck Feeney is now giving away the last of his billions.
I wouldn't put him happy in the sense of content. I would say he's happy with what he's been able to do and wishes it would be more, and he's probably just as restless and consumed with trying to make it better now as he was in 1962.
He wants to be in the center of things. He wants to be where the action is. And if he has to get on an airplane and fly to 5 different airports, he'll go.
My husband said to him one time, why don't you just have a conference call instead of, spending a day and a half in the airport to get wherever.
I think my dad would wish he could live till he's 160, if not more, to keep involved. And he tells me how pissed he is that he's not going to be able to see how things turn out here or there. He wants to keep going.
He'll never retire. I doubt it. He couldn't. He can't.
I don't know, maybe the Lord's word is the decider on that. The poor are always with us. You know, you'll never run out of people you can help.